from BrigantiaBlackbird of Blackbird's Brew. Happy Saturday and welcome to this week's Loki video. We're touching upon a somewhat sensitive subject, so as always, let's just rip off the band-aid and dive in. Those who have been following this channel and my ongoing series about Loki in particular, you will be aware that I've been traveling down a road of spiritual evolution, and I've been asking questions every step along the way about what will this mean for my practice? How much are my beliefs actually shifting, and do I dare still imagine myself to be belonging to the same tribe as I did before? And I'd be curious to hear about the experiences of other pagans who've navigated similar waters. None of us have been the first to find ourselves wondering if we need to move on to another branch of the pagan path, and I'm sure none of us will be the last. So then talking about this a bit more widely within the community may prove helpful to others, and hopefully to ourselves as we navigate our way through. And to an extent, I think it's quite natural to go through a period of time when we are questioning whether or not our practices are aligned with what we truly believe and with our patron deity's preferences. After all, it isn't a cold relationship or a merely transactional relationship. A warm mutual regard seems to naturally grow between deity and devotee, and often we just want to make sure that we are worshiping in a manner that's most appropriate for that deity. And this desire may be somewhat heightened when there is a strong religious movement surrounding the pantheon the deity hails from. In Loki case, we have Asatru, heathenry, Norse paganism, just to name a few. And certainly many of the principles in common to those paths are principles that I share and I believe in. And that puts pressure on me to consider whether converting my practice and my witchcraft into a Norse pagan direction would be the most appropriate choice. Then on top of that, if there's also a disconnect between oneself and one's spiritual tribe, it can be quite appealing to consider moving on to another branch of paganism. In my own case, there are pagans out there who like to pretend that Wicca is not a modern-day pagan religion. There are witches out there who like to pretend that Wicca is not a form of witchcraft. There are people who honestly believe that Norse paganism and Wicca are just too different to find common ground, and that a Wiccan who focuses on Norse deity is somehow doing wrong or being dishonest. Believe me, I have heard all of these things before, and I know others have heard it too. And given all the factors I've mentioned, it seems only natural that a person would question, rethink, and put themselves through a spiritual and emotional wringer deciding on how to best proceed. And it isn't fun to feel othered. And this is what it's like. It is feeling othered, especially since that can happen just because you are a pagan. There are people who will other you for that. And then, if you're pagan and you don't have to be a leftist politically, that guarantees further alienation. And if on top of that, you're practicing witchcraft in some way that people are determined to think ill of, and have a patron deity that other people are determined to think ill of, let's just say that psychological resilience is going to be required. It's human nature to want to belong to a tribe, and it takes extra effort to stay healthy, in every sense of that term, when you are facing rejection, where you would hope to experience a sense of belonging. And as you might imagine, I have been meditating a lot more in recent months, and whatever I decide to do, ultimately I want to be at peace with that. I hope everyone feels at peace with their spiritual choices, especially if their ideas might take them a bit outside the mainstream of paganism. We need to be sure of the ground we stand on, otherwise we won't be standing on it for long. But it was during one of my meditations very recently that Loki gave me a bit of a wake-up call, and it led me to believe that I was looking at the future of my spirituality through the wrong lens, and that I had allowed some rather unhelpful voices inside my head. And it really comes down to what's actually important. He raised this question: who told you that your form of worship was unacceptable to me? And that question gave me a bit of a jolt because it implies several things. First, that I am creating a problem where none actually exists. Second, that my discomfort on this issue is emotionally driven, and that those feelings have more to do with listening to the wrong people than it does with an inner sense that I need to change things up. And three, that I have been reacting to disapproval of other humans rather than being more concerned with what Loki, and by extension the rest of the gods, think. Forms of worship have evolved throughout the ages, and even people who reference the same pantheons into the same time period in antiquity still had observable historical religious differences. Part of it had to do just with where people lived, the land itself. and how people survived on that land. Just one example would be whether the people were farming or raising herds of animals. That made a great deal of difference about what relationship with what deity was cultivated over and above the others. And when we think about the details of ceremonies and rituals, the exact details changed many, many times, and they're still changing to today. But the core faith and principles remained, and that is what actually counts. Very recently, the Wisdom of Odin channel posted an episode of the Folk podcast in which they discussed differences between North American paganism and European paganism, and it was in the context of modern day practice. There are no universal rituals, and certainly no central authority about the proper way to do things, but there are common values. But the arbiters of what is acceptable are the gods themselves, and they seem to be a lot less fussy over the hows of our worship and much more interested in our hearts and the why of our worship. I think the honest intention to learn from them, grow as people, is far more significant than exactly how we're conducting our rituals. Loki has reacted quite favorably when I performed a conventional Wiccan ritual and invited him into circle, and favorably with the more informal daily offerings I give to him and walking meditations. And come to think of it, I've yet to experience a nudge that he wanted me to make a change to the form of my worship, especially with regarding him. I don't really think that's what he's focused on, with the exception of one notable occasion when I invited both Loki and the Morrigan into the circle. Strained politeness is the best description of that ritual, and believe you me, I did not repeat the exercise. But what has changed since my association with Loki began is that the sense of connection I once felt with the Celtic gods and goddesses has largely faded away. When I study them, I still feel an intellectual, an academic interest in them, but it's the same kind of interest I would have when reading about the Greek or the Roman pantheons, the Egyptian, or any other religion. Interesting stuff, good to know, but not relevant for my personal path. What does seem to remain the same is that I still find value in the structure of Wicca and its approach. There is a cycle of seasons that have literal, metaphorical, and spiritual value, and that's the reason why so much of Wicca revolves around that. And I see a lot of those ideas mirrored in Norse mythology, especially if you move beyond the surface level or a literalist interpretation. Wicca and Norse paganism are not the same by any means, but neither are they in opposition to each other. And the famed harm none provision of the Wiccan Rede, which is often grossly misinterpreted and taken to the point of absolute absurdity, it seems to be the chief sticking point of people who don't like the idea of Norse Wicca. But I would say I would actually point such detractors to the Havamal. That has a lot to say about peaceful interactions within a community and towards strangers. It implies a certain etiquette that covers situations in which no one is initiating the use of force. Obviously, when there is aggression, directed at you, the advice changes about how you ought to handle that. Because for the simple reason that you treat the person attacking you quite differently from the person who is not attacking you. And if that same principle was understood about Wicca, and if it was understood that the Rede is referring to common, everyday, peaceful interactions amongst people, and that it isn't about how to react to aggression or what's morally permissible when you are aggressed upon, then maybe it would also be understood that the morals of Wicca are not at odds with the values of Norse paganism. And there's so much noise about how to practice witchcraft and paganism, and I try not to add to this noise on this channel. I try to say things of substance. I try to toss out topics of conversation that have relevance for how we actually practice and how we actually live. But at the same time, the noise is there all around me, and I can't claim that I never get unduly influenced by that noise. Maybe if I ignored everything around me, I would be able to escape it. But if I did that, I would also be ignoring people who do have something valuable to say, and they are teaching things worth knowing, and they are bringing up things that are really involve a lot of deep thinking. So clearly the solution is not to stop engaging with ideas or stop engaging with people, but just to periodically take stock and ask myself if what I'm hearing reflects what's truly important. Loki really shook me off a train of thought that led absolutely nowhere. And because he did this, it has helped me regain some perspective for my own personal path. All that really matters is if I have a good relationship with him. The form that my practice takes is secondary. My craft is about techniques and what's effective, and none of that has to change in order to honor Loki. And if my approach doesn't happen to suit some people, oh well! They're going to have to pursue their spirituality in a manner consistent with their beliefs, but they're not in charge of my spiritual life, and nor should that ever be felt to be the case. I think the main lesson from all of this is just to take all things with a grain of salt and not lose sight of personal spiritual priorities. Now, I don't know if this will be particularly helpful for anyone else, but at the very least, if you do find yourself at kind of a crossroads in your own spirituality, I hope this has made you realize that you are not alone. Other people are thinking about this sort of thing. It can throw all of us for a loop, and we can get through to the other side of it. So chin up and hang in there. But I think that's all I have to say at this particular moment. Let me know what you think in the comment section below, or you can come see me on Discord at Blackbird's Brew. There is a link to join in the description box below. I'd be very happy to see you there, and hope you'll pop in. But that's it for now, and bye.